Hi, Paola Jo from SederQuilts. I'm going to be cutting some borders. I've had people ask me about this before, and I keep thinking we're gonna do a quick little video on this, and today is the day we're gonna finally do it. Borders and binding and straight grain and cross grain and bias grain. I'm going to be cutting some borders and binding for one of our Cross of Mini Squares quilts, and I have several options of fabric that are going to work. And so as I was looking through and figuring and doing the math in my head of what's going to be the best option, because there are always oodles of options, you know, I thought this would be a perfect moment to just stop and have Lori tape a quick little thing here so that we can explain a few things to you. When you buy fabric right off the bolt, and they unwind the bolt, and it's about 40 to 45 inches wide or so, and it's folded in half, so you see 20 inches at a time, and if you open it all up, it's 40. This little folded line over here is usually not real straight, so you usually have to iron it out before, well, I like to iron it. I like to iron that out before I start doing things, but oftentimes that permanent fold that was there just never completely goes away if it's in a real visible spot of the fabric. So sometimes I need to work around that fold because it doesn't come out all the way. But when you first look at fabric that's come off the bolt like this, these edges over here are called the selvage. It's finished in such a way that this is wrapped really tight and this doesn't ravel. It doesn't unravel. And so the selvage edge usually is a pretty straight line. The cut edge over here has lots of little threads that shred and whatnot, but this is cross grain, and anything that's parallel to this selvage edge is length of grain. There are really strong fibers going this way, and there's slightly weaker threads going across the grain. And why is this important? What does this mean? Well, if you use fabric that's cut on the straight of grain, it's very strong, there's very little stretch. And if you use fabric that's on the cross grain, it has a little bit of stretch. And when you're making borders, if you can use fabric that's on the straight of grain, it's going to be a much better frame. It's going to be nice and sturdy and strong, and it will hold things together better. If you use fabric that's cut on the cross grain, there's a little bit of give, there's a little bit of stretch. It's just a little easier to ease it into things, but it's easier to stretch it too. If you use fabric that's been cut on the bias, on a 45-degree angle, there's a lot more stretch there. So, no stretch with the length of grain, a little bit of stretch on the cross grain, and there's a lot of stretch on the bias. When I make binding, I like fabric that's cut at that 45-degree angle with all that stretch for lots of reasons, and we already have videos about binding and why I like bias, and so go check out those other videos. But that extra stretch is really nice, but oh my goodness, if you use bias cut fabric for your border's gonna stretch and be all wavy and saggy, and you'll have problems. So as a utilitarian quilter, I'm going to use whatever fabric I have that's the right size and the right color and is going to work, and I'll make it work, whether it's straight or cross grain. But if I'm going to be going and buying new fabric, and I can buy however much I need and want, there are a few things to consider. So I'm going to show you a couple of quick ways to figure in your head how much fabric you're going to need. So the easiest way to do this is you measure the longest side of your quilt, you add a little bit extra for whatever oopsies, and you buy that much fabric. So 64, you round it up a little bit, yeah, 72, yeah, 2 yards. 2 yards should be enough. Let's look at a real quilt pattern, okay? So for instance, the cross of many squares that we are using. If you make this with 2.5-inch squares, there are 24 squares across and 32 squares down, so you're going to be at about 48 inches wide and about 64 inches long. So how do I figure out how much fabric I need, or you need, for your borders? Well, if the top of the quilt is about 48 inches, okay, and 48 down here, and your length is going to be 64 inches, it's usually best to put your borders on the long sides first, okay, and that way this is the longest piece that you need to have, and that's 64 inches. And then you can add your 48s on the top and bottom because they are now going to be bigger. It was 48 to here, but now whatever size your border is, you now have to add 2 of whatever this is to this number. So this number is going to get bigger. By adding the corners to the short border and creating a little bit longer border on the top and bottom, it creates a more balanced look. It makes the length of the short and long borders a little more even, so it creates a little more balance. If we went the other way around, if you added the borders to the short ends first, okay, so this is a 48 piece. If you put the top and the bottom on first, and now you're going to put the side on, this 64 now becomes an even bigger number. And so you get it looking even longer and skinnier and longer and skinnier if you do it that way. So I almost always prefer, if I have the choice, sometimes some of the choices are already made for you for other reasons, but whenever possible, you want to put the long borders on first. Okay, so the longest piece we need is 64 inches basically. Now, I always like to round up and plan for a little bit more just in case, but we're going to pretend that we're perfect in our seam allowances and everything is going to be exactly 64. So if I want a 5-inch border and a 5-inch border and a 5-inch border and a 5-inch border, we're going to have 64 inches here, both sides, and this 48 becomes 5, and 5 is going to be an extra 10. That's going to be 58. So we have 58 inches we need here. We have 64 inches we need here. How do we find that much in our fabric? Let's look at this. So normally our width of fabric is going to be about 40 to 45 inches depending on the brand of the fabric. But when it's folded in half, we're going to have at least 20 inches most of the time. So I can easily do 5, 10, 15, 20 inches across, and it's doubled, okay? And so if I'm cutting a 5-inch border, I know I can get 4 pieces there. And I'm going to cut it with the length of grain as much as possible. So if I know that I need about 64 inches of length to this quilt, I'm going to get about 64 inches of fabric. Now if you can do math quickly in your head, or if you just know these things, a yard of fabric is 36 inches. 36 and 36 is going to be 72 inches. Okay, so a yard of fabric is going to give you 36 inches of length off the bolt. And if I have 2 yards of fabric, it's going to be 72 inches. So if I have a yard here and a yard here, this is only 64, 72 is longer than that. So as I said earlier, 2 yards, yep, that's going to work really well. Trust me. So in a perfect world, if I had 2 yards of fabric for my borders, there'd be enough and I wouldn't have to splice it at all. I'd have a yard, I'd have 2 yards, that's 72 inches. 2 yards is going to be plenty. But I'm probably going to have too much fabric. If I need 5-inch borders, and I only need 1, 2, 3, I only need 4 pieces, that's only half the fabric. So I have half the fabric left. So I could get by with a yard of fabric instead. If I have 1 yard of fabric, and I have 36 inches, and I cut 4 pieces, they're all 5 inches wide, so I've got 5, 10, 15, 20 inches doubled, that's 40, that's all still within this 40 inches width of fabric. 36, I've got 8 chunks, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I've got plenty of fabric in 1 yard to piece my borders. So in this case scenario, we're going to sew 36 and 36 together. That's going to be 72 minus the seam allowance of a 1/2 inch. Yeah, we still have plenty. So let's pretend I have a piece of fabric that's going to be perfect, but it's not quite a yard. Let's say I have a piece of fabric already in my stash, but it's not quite 36 inches long, but it is full width of fabric. If my length is a little too short, so instead of needing just 2 pieces here, what if it's only gonna get me most of the way, but not quite? I need a little bit more here, which means I'm gonna need a little bit more here, but I probably have enough to get across the bottom. There are some ways to make up this difference. So in this case scenario, we have 25 inches. 25 plus 25 plus 25 is 75, minus a couple of seam allowances. Yeah, that's going to be enough. Oh, but now we need more pieces. How are we going to do that? First of all, instead of 5-inch borders, I could make the borders a little narrower. Let's look at something. So on this piece of fabric, if I fold it in half, and I fold it in half again, they're going to be about 5 inches wide, maybe even, a little bit generous even, but I'm going to easily get 5-inch strips out of there. But I'm only going to get 8 pieces. If I need 9 or 10 pieces, I could cut this a little bit smaller if I cut it into 4-inch strips instead. Because again, I've got 40 inches divided by 4, that's 10. I would have 5 strips across. Now I'd have 10 pieces of length, and it would be fine. So even if I don't have a full yard of fabric, I could make the borders just a little narrower and still have plenty. So again, if I have at least 2 yards of fabric, which I do of this, I'm going to cut 1 strip the length that I need, and by the time this is all pieced, it's going to be a little bit shorter than what it's on the design board. I'm going to make just my 5-inch strips that I need. I'm only going to need to use half of this fabric, and I can cut the other half into squares that I can use throughout the quilt. That'll look really pretty. But if I only have 1 yard of this fabric, and I still have enough, if I only had 1 yard instead of 2 yards, but it was full width, 1 yard would work. But when I cut those strips, okay, each strip is going to be about this size. I'm going to need 2 of them per sides, and I'm going to need about 1.5 across the top and the bottom. So I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need about 7 strips. 8 would be the easiest way to go, because then you know you have enough. But then we have to piece them. So when I piece the 2 edges here, and I keep things at a real straight seam. A straight seam only uses about a 1/2 inch of fabric, so that doesn't take up very much. And then when you attach it over here on the other side, you just watch where your seam is, and you press your seams in opposite directions so that they nest really nicely, and that should work fine. But if you're off just a little bit, that's really going to bother some of you. Some of you are a little bit more OCD than I am. So instead of sewing my border pieces together with a real straight seam, I now do what Darlene does. One of the things that she does on her borders is she always puts them together with a mitered edge instead of a straight edge, and that way it doesn't matter where her seam is on her border, you just don't notice it. And so if I have enough fabric where I have that extra to make a diagonal seam on there, That is so much nicer because then it doesn't matter as much where it lines up next to your seam in the quilt top. So I was showing you that with this gorgeous batik because I had a 2-yard piece of that, long enough piece. But what I'm really going to be using for the borders is a solid piece. I like using a solid color that coordinates nicely with the dark border right around the cross. And it just gives it a nice finished look with a scrappy quilt. It's so many busy colors. The solid border just really sets it off nicely. With the cross of many squares, there are so many beautiful fabrics to choose from. If I use a solid border and it's not quite long enough. So let's pretend that I was able to get all the way around and I had almost enough but not quite enough. You could take the extra off another corner and patch it in here, but then it looks like you ran out and you patched it. But you could be a little bit creative. We could pick one of the other colors that coordinates from somewhere else and add another piece in between here so that it looks like you purposely did this. We could even split it and add several pieces if you needed to. And you could even do it in a couple of different places. You could randomly have them spread out a little bit more if you needed to, or you could be very, very square and purposeful about making them very square blocks, whatever works best for you. But yes, you could extend your border a tad more by adding another piece of fabric, especially if it coordinates back to somewhere else in the quilt. Yeah, I think that would work. And you could do it in just one corner if you'd like, or you could do it in a couple of corners. Now we're going to pretend, you have to put your pretending hats on for a second. We're going to pretend that this purple is the same as what's up there. You could even extend this same purple down a little bit and then put in your extra piece and then start it again so that it's away from the actual corner a little bit. Another option you can do is you can totally put in cornerstones with your borders. And this happens quite often when we totally forget to add the width of the additional border when you're figuring out how much you need on the top border. Don't ask me how I know how that happens, because you know it does happen once in a while. So you could totally add in a cornerstone in each corner too. And again, you could still add one or two more if you need to, just to extend it if you're close but not quite. Another option, we could make that border even narrower and we could put it as a narrow border inside. And that would work too, especially if I was going to be using a solid binding on the outside. That looks really nice. Put a color with a narrow border and then a solid outer binding, especially like black and black. I've done that on a couple of them, and that looks really nice too. Just to make the fabric fit the piece that I happen to have. But there's always another way you can figure around the puzzle if something isn't coming out just quite the way you originally had it planned. So instead of getting all upset about it, I just try to figure out, okay, now what will work instead? Yeah, there are a lot of ways you can do this with the scraps you have in your own stash. One of the reasons I like to start with, about a 5-inch border is, first of all, it's easier math to figure in my head. 5, 10, 15, 20 is way easier than 3.5 and 7 and 10.5. It gets too hard for me to do more than about 2 or 3 in my head if I have something other than 5. The other thing is, with the cross of many squares, I'm mainly using 2.5-inch squares, and I oftentimes start with 5-inch pieces of fabric, charm packs or whatnot. But when I cut these, I cut them into 5-inch squares because then it's easy to plan out with bigger chunks, and then we can cut them in half both ways and have our 2.5. So if I cut 5-inch borders and there's any left over, I now have 5-inch squares that I can cut more 2.5-inch square blocks. So that's another reason why I like to go with 5-inch borders if I can, because then I don't have as much wasted fabric in my scraps. Okay, so here's the fabric, the piece of fabric I'm really going to use. Let's measure and figure out exactly how and where I'm going to cut this. Okay, so there's the salvages, here's the fold. This is the length of fabric coming off the bolt. And I have about a yard. I actually have a little over 38 inches, so it's a tad longer than a yard. And coming across, this one is a little bit narrower than usual. Usually with cherry wood it's going to be at least 44, usually 45 inches wide, but this one is 38.5 inches wide. So it's square, it's 38.5 in both directions. So, as we already said, we're going to cut the borders parallel to the salvage edges. So they're going to be this way. Okay, that's what we're going to have. And we're going to need 2 pieces for each side. We're going to use almost 2 pieces for both top and bottom. So we need how many pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We need basically 8 pieces. Alrighty, so if I have this folded, I don't want to cut an odd number. I don't want to have that fold showing. So we need this now into 4 pieces because it's doubled, so we'll have 8. I'm going to cut off the selvage and I'm going to cut the fold off. And then we're going to cut this in half again. And because it was less than 40, they're going to be slightly less than 5-inch borders. But by the time we get this all cut nice and even, this is basically what we're going to have for our borders. And they're going to be just a tad shy of 5 inches. By the time I get that selvage off there, they're going to be about 4.5 inch wide. So all that figuring in my head originally is guesstimating. I don't know if you guys learn how to guesstimate in school anymore, but I guesstimate quite often to get close, to get into the ballpark. And then when it's right down to time, then I do the math and stuff. But anyway, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to cut my selvages off and we're going to cut strips. So I'll be taking this over to the cutting board. We're going to trim off the selvage because you don't want to use that. We're going to trim that little dab off and then we're going to fold it in half the other way so that we can make our cuts this way and get our 4 pieces doubled up. It will be 8. So yeah, we're going to go cut that and then we'll have our borders. I will have 19 divided by 4 is 4 3/4, not quite 5. So this is going to be 4 3/4. And because it's all doubled up, this is 2 strips. And then again, I'm going to do 4 3/4, 4 3/4. Okay, so those are for the long sides. Now, for the short sides, I don't need all of this, and I would love to have a few 2.5-inch squares to use in the quilt itself. And I need at least 58. Let's say I need 60. So if I had 30 and 30, that would be 60. How much do I have left up here for a 2.5? I think I'm just going to cut off just a 2.5, and then that way I will still have almost 17, that'll be 34, that will be 6, oh, that's plenty. I don't think I have enough to cut 5 though. If I have a 2.5 and a 2.5 and I cut 5, I'm down to 14, so that's 28. That's 56. I need 58. So I cannot get 2 sections off there, but I could get 1. Because I'm cutting them slightly less than 5, I won't be able to cut 2.5s off the extra there, so I want to cut that first. So I want to cut a 2.5 inch, I'm gonna go right about there. And let me double check, triple check. I've got 2.5, could even go just a smidget more. Okay, so now I want to make sure I'm really nice and square again. Square in all directions. I can cut that off. And now I can cut some 2.5 inch squares out of those. Now, going back. Okay, and I want 4 3/4. Whew, did you see that? I almost got off track with all the squirrels there. So, almost 5, we're at 4 3/4. Yep. I was tempted to change my way of doing it quite a bit, but I decided, no, I better just stick to the plan here. Less likelihood of making a mistake. Okay, 4 3/4, 4 3/4. Look at there, see, and it's just the perfect amount to cut off that selvage. That was very little waste. Alrighty, so I've got my borders, and now I can cut my 2.5. I want to do it with this so I can see my line really well. 2.5. All right, so now we need 2.5. Those are too small. 5 and 2.5. All right, so now I have 4, 8, I have 12. Woo-hoo, I got 12 squares out of that besides. And we've got all the borders. Yay! There you go. Okay, so we have 2 sets of longer borders and 2 sets of shorter borders, and there's 2 in each thing. So when we put this together, it will be plenty long for the top and the bottom, yes. So I'll mark those as the top borders and these as the bottom borders. And again, we've got 2, and so by the time we sew them up, oh yeah, that's gonna be plenty long. So yes, I will get those all marked nicely for her, and that'll be included in her kit. Yay. Alrighty, and now I have the borders, and I have exactly the same fabric for around the cross border. And we'll see how many of those I can put on here. Oh, that'll be perfect. And then that way things will match really, really well. There, now I can fill in with the rest. Oh yeah, that's gonna be perfect. Love it. Hope this was helpful, and if it was confusing, ask me some questions. We'll try to straighten it out for you later. Toodaloo.